Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. In a minute, I'll be joined by ESPN's Nick Wagoner as we talk about Deebo Samuel. Yes, he's on the trade block. This is a legit trade block for Deebo Samuel. The 49ers say he's fine doing it. So Deebo's out looking for a trade partner. So I wanted to bring on Nick Wagoner to talk about all the ramifications of this. So what does Deebo Samuel have left? What might it take to get him? Is he worth trading for? And what he knows, and this is good insight that he gave on what Adam Peters might think about Deebo Samuel. And one thing I know for sure is Adam Peters keeps things very close to the vest. You should be happy about that. But anyway, that's why I wanted to bring on someone who dealt with that Niners organization for years and still does in Nick. And so I think it's really good insight. And then also I wanted to ask about there are a couple other 49er free agents, and then as well as knowing what he knows about Peters, but also about how the 49ers operated. Would he think that Peters might make a big swing at something this offseason? What he learned from the 49ers that maybe could transfer to this offseason here. A lot of some of this is speculation. We're just trying to play some what might happen here. So if you get tired of that, I'm sorry, but that's what the offseason's about. So I get tired of it too. But for now, we got a little bit of time before free agency. So I want to bring Nick on. And I think there's a timetable here with Deebo, like if something's going to happen, it'd probably be certainly within the next month. So anyways, so stay tuned for that for a minute. So just one or two little things before I get there. Don't forget, for you club members, for regular club members, I'm doing the private Zoom for you guys on Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Get in there. Hopefully we get a few of you guys in there, can ask whatever questions you want. I'll answer to the best of my ability. And then for you gold members, doing the private Zoom for you guys on Thursday at 7:30. So you know the drill for that as well. So if you want to become a club member and participate in some of these chats, I'm going to be doing these more on a regular basis for the regular club members. Just to provide you more access and more information. But if you want to become a club member, go to the Ampire Media YouTube page, see the word join, click on there, go from there. Anyways, so that's all I got to say, folks. There's not a whole lot going on right now. Oh, one thing that we did learn on Monday, that Marty Herney is no longer with the organization. He had been listed on the website. His name has been taken off. He was just an advisor this year. He was not a part of any decision-making process. I never saw him at the games, never saw him around the facility, but he was being paid an advisory role. I think, he was a help to Josh Harris throughout the sale process, just with, I think, how what he was able to help him with the whatever information about the team, whatever. So they kept him around for now, but he was really not a part of the decision-making process. The decision makers were Adam Peters and then his right-hand guy, Lance Newmark, then, of course, Dan Quinn involved in that. But it was such a better setup than it had been. But regardless, Herney is now officially out. Martin Mayhew is sticking around. He was signed to a new role. He's been out there. He's a presence. He's at every game. He's at the facility. It's a different situation. He's in a different role, one that he held in San Francisco. And so Peters knows him, has worked with him, but Herney, he's done. So anyways, that came out today. I don't know exactly when they finalized it, but I know he was removed from the website as of Monday. So anyway, without further ado, here's my conversation with ESPN's Nick Wagoner talking about Deebo Samuel. Well, Nick, I think it's now required to have you on every so often because there's always seems to be a tie with this franchise and the Niners franchise. But who knows what's going to happen here? But I want to fill people in on the Deebo Samuel situation, obviously. And just, you wrote a good primer on this several days ago on ESPN.com. In a nutshell, why now for Deebo Samuel requesting a trade?
Look, there's kind of a lot of layers to this, but I think where we start is the simplest place, which is that this is just kind of a relationship that has run its course. And I think both sides had that feeling coming into this offseason, particularly coming off of a down year for Deebo Samuel. And so, the trade request, it is what it is, but also for Deebo, it's almost a way of getting out ahead of what is kind of an inevitable divorce. I think that was the verbiage I used in that story. And it's kind of the way I view it here, where one way or another, this thing was probably going to end this offseason. I think everybody kind of knew that everything was headed that way. The only way that would have changed is if Deebo had a big year last year, and then the Niners might have had to reassess some things. But I think the Niners, obviously, they preferred not to release Deebo Samuel. I still think that is a possibility, that will be the ultimate thing that happens here. John Lynch at the end of the season in his season-ending press conference said, we don't let good players get out of the building. We're not going to release him. I think a lot of that is just, maintaining leverage for a potential trade, right? Like we're not going to tell the world we're going to release the guy because we'd like to get something back for him. But I think when you factor in a number of things that over the years, and I'll go back to when Deebo Samuel signed his contract extension in 2022, he was coming off of his best year. Honestly, John, in my over 2 decades of covering the league, one of the single best years by any individual player I've ever witnessed. He almost single-handedly carried the 49ers, at least offensively, to the Super Bowl that year. He was so good. And when the Niners and he negotiated that contract, the Niners were very adamant about the contract length of that deal. They did not want to go more than 3 years, which is ultimately what the extension ended up being. And the reason for that being is that a player like Deebo Samuel has something of a shelf life. He is he like the thing that makes him great is also the thing that concerns you because he runs through people's faces. He's unafraid of contact. All those things that you love about him, there's a double-edged sword where it also shortens the lifespan of him being able to continue to produce at that level because injuries pile up and all those kinds of things. So I always felt like this was the year that the Niners were going to have to make that kind of decision between Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. They really made that decision last year when they signed Brandon Ayuk, and then of course when Deebo Samuel followed it up with not a great season. So all of those things have kind of led us to this point that we're at right now.
And when because obviously I had you on to talk about Brandon Ayuk in the summertime,
Yeah.
but you had said this, like if this is how you kind of have always envisioned this playing out, but what do you think Debo does have left?
I still do think he has some gas left in the tank. I think what you saw last year, there was a few things, and it's funny, John, because I'm not going to revise history here. Going into last season during training camp, Debo showed up at training camp, and I know it's such a cliche thing, but he was in great shape. He looked great. He had a really good camp. He was one of the few big name guys that was constantly available and on the field, the practice field. When other guys were dealing with injury or whatever, or contract stuff, Debo was there and he kind of set the tone. And I thought, man, like he's got a chance to have a really big year. And part of that is he was almost in a de facto contract year. He wasn't exactly in a contract year, but he might as well have been for the reasons that we're here discussing right now. And I was like, man, a motivated Debo is a dangerous Debo. And so I would say now he really is at that precipice of is there something left in the tank and how motivated is he to prove to the world that he still has that? I would imagine is pretty great. Now, as the season went on, he was not in as great a shape and some of the he had a lot of injuries that kind of piled up. There was an illness like pneumonia symptoms at one point early in the season that cost him most of a game. So those things kind of factored into this. But I do think there's still good football left in Debo. I think the big thing for him is going to be to find a landing spot that utilizes him as well as the 49ers do. And that's a lot easier said than done because Kyle Shanahan would build game plans around Debo. And a lot of the things that he would do for other guys in the offensive arsenal were based off of if I send Debo here in this motion or he does this linebacker is going to follow him or this safety is going to follow him. And that's going to open up a wheel route for Christian McCaffrey on the other side, whatever it is, right? Like, so those are the kinds of things that have to, where Debo is the most effective. The biggest, most jarring drop off for him last year, where it really seemed like he wasn't the same guy, was when they were using him out of the backfield. Now, you can point to a couple of things for that. That's not entirely Debo's fault. Teams now were just kind of more adjusted to it. The novelty of it had worn off a bit. And so I think anytime he was in the backfield, teams were expecting him to get the ball. But his yards per carry was like 3.2 and a significant drop off from around 6, which is what it had been for the last few years before that. He also didn't break as many tackles as he usually does. This is not a guy who you bring in if you're saying we need someone who can consistently beat man coverage and separate one-on-one. That is just not his game. So whatever team is looking to acquire him has to have a plan for him where they can put him in position to get the ball in his hands, because I do think there's probably still some good football. 2021 Deebo is probably never going to come back. I think
No.
that's unlikely. But I think there is a happy medium there where this can still be a productive football player, particularly on a team such as Washington, where you do have an established guy like Terry McLaurin, who's a great route runner, who can do all those different things that maybe that Deebo doesn't do, and they can kind of act as a balance to each other. You just don't want multiple guys like that where they're kind of running into each other when they're trying to figure out a game plan.
Could Debo just be a receiver, or do you think that his effectiveness is because he can come out because the way they use him?
I think you could still I think you can primarily use him as a receiver. I think the value, the maximum value of Debo is when you can hand him the ball. But I will say it doesn't have to be out of the backfield. You know what I mean? Like there's still all the orbit motions and all the different things that you jet sweeps that you can do with him that he can be very effective at. And in fact, if you go back to that first 49ers Chiefs Super Bowl in Miami in 2020 after the 2019 season, I think he set that at the time. I don't know. I think it still stands the most rushing yards by a wide receiver in a Super Bowl. And almost all of that was that stuff. It wasn't him in the backfield. Like they didn't really do the backfield stuff until 2021, and that was out of necessity more than anything because Raheem Mostert got injured, Elijah Mitchell was banged up. They had a bunch of injury things that happened at running back, and so sure, you'd love to have it where you could pop him in the backfield and let him go, but maybe that part of his game is going to have to be significantly dialed down, largely because it hasn't been as effective. And like I said, the novelty has worn off. But there are still ways you can put the ball in his hands in short areas that makes it a lot easier so that he can, go do his thing, which whether that's a screen in the screen game or it is on those kind of jet sweeps and things like that.
Where was he most effective as a receiver over the years?
Yeah, I mean they moved him around a lot. I think a lot of times it was just kind of sending him in motion, and and I wouldn't say I don't know if the slot is the right term, but the way that they used him was a lot of intermediate stuff, right? So kind of over the intermediate middle of the field, which as you know is a huge staple of the Kyle Shanahan
Right.
offense. And so a lot of that is just the opportunity to get him with a head of steam, moving in one direction, throw him the ball, hit him in stride, and then let him do his thing. And so that is where he still I still think can be an effective guy. Slants, crossers, things like that. That's going to be his bread and butter. And he was never a deep ball guy, never necessarily a guy who was going to go up and high point and beat a taller corner or something like that. But getting him the ball on the move, or at least in a situation where he has some space to make one guy miss or run over a guy and then go. That's always been kind of his bread and butter.
So the last part of the year, his numbers were really down. Do you think that was just about injuries or something else?
I think he was out of shape or not in nearly as good a shape as he started the season. I mean, it was a thing that they had struggled with. That's been kind of documented here that when Wes Welker was the receivers coach here, that he was able to, he was kind of constantly on Debo about maintaining his weight and things like that. So I think as the season wore on, maybe some of that that caught up to him a little bit. But I also think maybe there's a human nature element too of like, the season was lost. Like this is not a team that was, and I'm not saying he didn't try. Don't get me wrong. I'm not implying that at all. I'm just saying that like it's a lot harder to kind of gather yourself and take the beating and do the types of things that you have to do when your season is lost, and especially when you're a team and you're so used to being in the thick of the race. And when you don't have Christian McCaffrey and you don't have Brandon Ayuk and the guys who are taking some attention away from you, now all eyes are kind of on you. And I think that didn't help things either. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but I think that toward the end of the year, some of that probably caught up to him. And I think he was probably pressing a little bit too, quite frankly, because there was a lot of people saying, what happened to Deebo? Where is he? And he had a 4 or 5 game stretch, which was, I've written it was one of the worst stretches of his career. I mean, I think he had under 35 total scrimmage yards in each game for like 4 or 5 straight games, which he had never done. At least since his rookie year, I don't think he'd had a stretch of even under 50 for 5 straight games, and he was under 35. So just to give you an idea of kind of where he was at towards the end of the season. But I think there's a lot of factors, and this year, John, you've covered years like that where like it's hard to it becomes very difficult to evaluate almost just because so many things were in flux and their offensive line was full of guys who were pulled off of the street and all those different things that they were trying to do. And that's not to make excuses. I think he had a down year. I think he'd be the first one to say that. But I do think there was a number of factors that kind of contributed to it.
So two more on him. One, what saying all that, if does somebody have to stay in on him to stay in shape? And so if he's like that, what is somebody going to get at this point in his career? Like, is that something that's been an issue like that, or what kind of guy is he in the locker room then?
I mean, he's beloved. He's beloved as a teammate. I think teammates love him because of his style of play, where he isn't afraid to go out there and kind of set a tone. Like that is one of the things that I think that he and Trent Williams too,
Yeah.
for that matter, those two guys together were kind of tone setters and have been for this run of success that the 49ers had. I think for him, it's just a matter of yes, getting in shape. But I do think whatever team acquires him is going to get a motivated version of him for at least 2025 because Deebo is a very prideful guy, and I think he's going to have something to prove to show everybody that he can still play. So I think that part of it will probably resolve itself. Now, again, it's a matter of like can he get in shape, and stay healthy for the course of a season. That's kind of the X factor that is involved in all this. And I also think that when you have just in terms of like what a price would be and what
Right.
an acquiring team would have to get up, which I'm sure you want to get to,
That
but
was the
like
other question.
yeah, sure. And I mean, we just go right into it here.
Yep.
Like I just think that the 49ers are pretty dead set from the people I've talked to on moving on here. Deebo is pretty dead set on moving on here. So I don't think the price is going to be very much. The 49ers were open to trading Deebo Samuel last year. I've written this before, the kind of offers that they were getting last year, that people were calling about both Ayuk and Samuel at that time. And the offers they were getting for Ayuk were the ones that they would have strongly considered for Deebo. I'm talking like late first, early second round type of draft picks. I know the Patriots were very interested in Ayuk with their second round pick. If that offer had been made for Deebo, he probably would have been traded last year. That didn't happen. I think they probably would have taken something later on day two for him, even at the time. Now it's really hard to envision that they would get a day two pick for him, based on the fact that all the things I just laid out about performance, but also when you factor in the other receivers that are going to be available and are available, whether that's Devontae Adams or Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins in the free agent market, Keenan Allen. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there that I think would make it hard when a team also could look at it and say, well, we could just get him, if he's released or whatever. So I think probably something on day three. Maybe they could sneak a day two if they include. The Niners sent something back with Deebo in that regard. But I also just wonder if there's going to even be much of a market because I think teams know the 49ers are ready to
Yeah.
move on here. And the big thing for the 49ers is it worth it? Because if they trade him, it accelerates a lot of dead money, void year dead money onto the salary cap. It would be for 2025 almost $31 million that they would have to eat if you trade him. And if you don't trade him and you do release him and you do the post June 1, you could theoretically push 20 million of that into 2026. So you would then be asking the question, well, is it worth it for the cap space? Would we rather just have the cap space this year and release him and do it post June 1, or do we want to trade him and just eat it all right now? I personally, if you're just asking me, no one cares about my opinion, but I think they should just eat it and be done with it. Like I think they're probably at that point. You have Purdy's contract coming up, you have Kittle's contract coming up. You can probably push some of their money, bigger money, into later years. Eat the Deebo money now, get it over with, and we've seen teams do it with, I
Yeah.
mean, way bigger numbers than 30
Yeah.
million. I mean, you want to talk about Russell Wilson and
Yeah.
and Denver, or you can go, the Rams when they were kind of revamping things, Todd Gurley and Jared Goff and Brandon Cook. I mean, there was a lot of contracts that they were willing to eat and just get it over with. So every team, the bill comes due at some point. So those are all kind of the factors that I think are going to play into this. But I do think that he could be had at what I would consider a very reasonable price. And maybe I'm in the minority. I think he would be worth a flyer on for a team like Washington that is a contender who would get a motivated version of him on a good team. If you sent him to the NFL hinterland somewhere, it might be a different conversation. I know that's new for you folks in Washington to not be referred to as the hinterlands, and good for you guys. What a fun ride, and a lot of good football in front of them. But I don't think it would be an outrageous reach for them if they saw the value and they felt like Cliff Kingsbury could get the most out of him.
Doesn't he have a bonus due in March that doesn't that, could that be a deciding factor about when they might release him?
Yeah, it's a 10 it's 10 the 10th day of the league year, so I think around March 22nd, I believe, is it's like $15 million option bonus. And basically it's money that's already in factored in, but it would become guaranteed kind of
Okay.
situation. So, yeah, I mean, I think the Niners would like to have this settled right after the league year
Okay.
begins. And so they gave him the permission to seek the trade if they come back and his agent Tory Dandy comes back and says, we've got a fourth round pick or a fifth round pick or whatever. I think the Niners would probably be happy to get that done. So yeah, that's kind of the deadline, soft deadline that I think everyone's looking at. But I would imagine they would get it rectified even before that, so that they can know at least if they're gonna
Right.
eat how much money that they're going to eat this year, and then they can spend elsewhere appropriately, knowing what the kind of cost certainty is of that move.
So obviously, the last thing here is on Adam Peters. Obviously, who ties to San Francisco. So a couple part question. One, do you have any idea what he thought of Deebo? And then two, a lot of talk about what these guys might do in the offseason. And I think so, he wants to build through the draft. We know that. But there were multiple times with the Niners where they swung big. So what do and again, like we're all kind of guessing. Adam's very quiet about his intentions. I'll say that,
Yeah,
which is why
sure.
I want to ask you. But like you know that organization, you know the philosophy from where he came, one of the places from where he came. So there you go. That's a couple part question there. So let's go. And
What was the
we're
first
not
question
supposed
again?
to
What
we're
was it?
not supposed to ask those kind of questions. I know that. I'd be get dinged from one of our summits, but
What was the first question again?
I don't remember.
You
No,
don't remember.
what Adam, if you know what Adam thought about Debo when he was there.
Debo, yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, I think Adam thought very highly of
I
Debo,
mean, it's
and
hard
I
not to.
know. Well, the thing that I think was really interesting is Debo was, it's hard. You and I especially get into this when we do our mock draft at ESPN, and when the teams we cover have a really high pick, you and I agonize over,
Yes.
trying to get as much information from people, trying to determine what's a lie and what's not a lie, and getting these right. I say that only because Debo, as a second round pick, which you and I usually, when it gets into the later part of the first round, and you'll be doing this year, and I'm sure you're very happy about it, where
Yes.
it's not quite as stressful because
Right.
there's so many variables in front of it, it's almost impossible to get right. But if you had asked me in 2019 when Debo came out, who the Niners' second round pick was going to be, if you had asked me that, like let's say the equivalent of right now, I could have told you Deebo Samuel.
Right.
And the reason for that is because the 49ers that year coached in the Senior Bowl. And so they
Right.
had their whole staff down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile. Kyle Shanahan was there, John Lynch was there, the whole crew was there, and they had Debo on their team, and they fell in love with him. And Kyle Shanahan didn't hide it. Like other people I talked to in the organization, they didn't hide it. It felt like, and I'm lumping Adam into this without actually hearing it directly from him, but I know from people who were there that were like, oh yeah, this is the guy who he's going to be our wide receiver version of George Kittle, where he's going to run through your face. We're going to set a physical tone. This is who we want to be, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that was on the heels of drafting Dante Pettis previously. Dante Pettis in the second round. Uh, I'll just say not necessarily checking the box of tone setting toughness that the 49ers wanted. And so Debo was a correction to that in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I think that was, I would imagine there's a lot of respect there. Adam, of course, knows all the background and the ups and downs that have existed, but I would think he would have at least some level of interest. But again, as with everything, depending on the cost, both in terms
Correct.
of compensation
Right.
and then a contract. And that's the other question with Debo that I don't think any of us really know is, does he want an extension right now to whatever team he goes to? If he gets released, obviously he has to sign a new contract anyway. But if he just gets traded, does he want an extension? I don't know the answer to that. I would think he would, but I also would think maybe he would say, I'll play this year out and I'll show you that I still have gas in the tank, and then try to get another deal. But again, that's just speculation. I don't know that for sure.
And then with Peters again, the big question here is,
Oh yeah,
Miles Garrett's available. This guy's available. Will they
sure.
swing big? Will they? But and like he wants to build through the draft. We all know he wants to build through the draft, but he also saw the Niners take some big swings for guys who could make a difference.
Yeah, it's funny because I think people view the Niners for a long time, and fans still talk about this, and it's weird to me as like not being aggressive, and I'm like, man, they're so aggressive. Like
Yeah.
they have been very aggressive, and I know like everyone points to the Trey Lance trade as the big whiff, right? Like that would be the reason not to be aggressive. But it's a very different conversation when you're talking about an established all-pro player that you would be getting in return as opposed to a raw young quarterback. So I would go back to this and I would say that when the 49ers made the move they did for Trey Lance, which was the biggest of big swings, and
Right.
they have made other ones, right? They did trade for Trent Williams, which was still one of the steals of the century in terms of sorry to the people
Hey,
there. Listen, but
you can
I'm
you
not
can
telling them
call you could
anything they
call
don't know.
you could
Yeah.
call him Luca Trent Williams at this point for that kind of
Yeah,
hype.
right, right. Yeah, I'm not telling anybody there anything they don't know. But Christian McCaffrey, obviously, D Ford, even when they dealt for a second rounder for him and signed him to a big contract, that was a big trade. So they have not been afraid to make those kinds of deals for those guys that they felt like fit the mold. But going back to the Trey Lance trade, a big part of the reason that they did what they did that year was they wanted to reset the clock. And by reset the clock, I mean in terms of quarterback salary and what that would allow them to do on the roster, go out and get certain guys. And they could go, sign Trent Williams to a huge deal. They could afford, all of a sudden, you can afford to have an $18 million running back. Like, those are the things. And obviously, they got even luckier than they could have imagined because even though Trey Lance didn't
Right.
work out, they have Brock Purdy, who is a fraction of the cost of Trey Lance, let
Right.
alone other
Right.
top quarterbacks, right? So I say that to say that I think that there is an appropriate level of aggressiveness that inherently comes when you have a quarterback on a rookie contract where you want to maximize that window. And I think Adam, as someone who was a part of the decision making to do that and was also here when Brock Purdy emerged and the Niners started laying out plans for how they were going to approach the Brock Purdy years and the moves that they were going to make. I'm sure that Adam, in his heart of hearts, says, no, like we're in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
This isn't pie in the sky where you're like, oh, we're headed in the right direction. Like, no, you're on the path. You're there. Like you're not looking for that trail. Like you're well down it at this
Right.
point. And so just kind of knowing that Adam has been around that, I would imagine he is in a position where he can be aggressive. And that doesn't mean being crazy, but if there are opportunities that present themselves to a valuable player who is well established, and you're going to be trading draft picks that they're going to assume are in the back part of the first round, which is part of why the Niners did with some of what they did, even including the Trey Lance trade, was I got to think that factors into the equation for him. Like, hey, yeah, would I give up the 29th pick or whatever plus a future number 30 pick for Myles Garrett? Probably. I think he probably would. And he can afford it because the contract stuff is also there, and you're not paying your quarterback 60 million bucks, which by the time Jaden's ready to get paid, it might be 70. So it might be
Oh, it might be
75.
more than
So
that. Yeah.
but they have the luxury right now of not having to think about that because by the time it's time to pay Jaden, a guy like a Myles Garrett,
Right.
he may be on his way out. You
Right.
should never know. And so I do think that when you get close, you have to view it as like this is our opportunity. We've got to do things. And that again, there's a difference between aggressive and crazy. And
Right.
and I think the 49ers have walked that line very well. And I know that again, they still get killed for the Trey Lance, and rightfully so. It was a bad trade. But they've made a lot of other big swing moves that put them in a position to almost win the Super Bowl. And so I'm sure Adam would like to put his team in a position to erase the almost in his experience and get the job done there. So yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised. And to me, I think we talked about this, off air here a couple of weeks ago. I was like, man, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Washington was
Yeah.
all over a guy like a Myles Garrett.
Me either. So, Nick, thank you very much for coming on. Always great insight. This may be like your fifth or sixth time, so you're getting to be like Steve Martin hosting SNL. So I appreciate
I,
that.
I figure whenever you
I
look
get
at the
some.
ratings book and the ratings have dipped a little bit, you're like, oh boy, here we go. I'll bring Nick back. We'll get those ratings back juiced up again. So
There you
uh,
go.
no, but I always enjoy talking, and it is. We've talked about this many times, but some of the similarities in team building and things, and of course with Adam, that was even before Adam.
Yeah.
But now that Adam's there, I feel like there is probably a lot of carryover. And shoot, I wouldn't be surprised to see some 49ers free agents land there this offseason either. So
They have a
there's
couple, I know like Ward's a free agent, although I think like they went out and got Lattimore for a reason because I don't think
Sure.
I think they viewed him as, this is their guy that they would have gotten this offseason. But what are there, speaking of that though, are there other Niner free agents that you think that might entice him?
I would be really interested to hear where he stands on Dre Greenlaw, the
Yeah.
linebacker. Greenlaw's a really good player. He has just had the worst injury luck, and he's coming off a season where he didn't even play two full games. He played a half of a game and then a few snaps in the other game because he was coming off of that torn Achilles that he suffered in the Super Bowl, and so I don't know what to make of his market. The Niners want to keep him. But I think the Niners are more in that range of like, well, we'd love to give you a 1 year prove it deal. We'll put in some incentives. Maybe it's if you play a bunch, you can make 10 million bucks, but it's probably going to be worth 4.5 at the time you sign. You know what I mean? Whatever,
Right, right,
whatever it
right.
is like that. But I do think that if there was a team like a Washington who came and said, "Hey, we'd be willing to, give you a couple years and give you a little bit more of a guarantee." And I'm not saying anything crazy. Like Drake Greenlaw is legitimately, if healthy, a $12 million a year player, maybe even more, a little bit more than that. But he just hasn't been that guy. So I don't think he's expecting to get anything like that. I just think that if there's a team that's willing to go a little bit above and beyond a 1 year prove it deal, then maybe that would be something that he'd be willing to do, and maybe he wants to go somewhere where he can get a little bit of a fresh start and kind of be his own guy, because he and Fred Warner are a dynamic duo, but this is still Fred's show, I think that may be something that factors into that too. So that would be a guy I'd keep an eye on. Talanoa Hufanga, the safety, is also a free agent who I think was an Adam guy they brought in the fifth round a few years ago. But again, also a tough market to read because he too has been injury prone. So there's guys like that. Aaron Banks, the guard, is another one that they drafted in the second round a few years ago, who's a solid player, maybe a little more than they would want to spend at that position. But those are just a few of the names that are out there. There's the Niners have a lot of free agents this offseason.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that Adam, as a guy who is familiar with some of them, has a pretty good handle on who he'd be interested in and who he wouldn't at this point.
For sure. And I think in some of those cases, like the linebacker, they have Frankie Louvu, but then they make a decision on Bobby Wagner, what
Right.
they work out a deal. So there's all sorts of things. And they have Jeremy Chin as a safety, but if you don't resign him, so there's all sorts of things to
Yeah,
consider
sure.
here. But anyways, Nick, always appreciate it. And thanks a lot, man.
You got it, man. See you later.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Nick for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Thursday with another episode talking to former Redskin tight end Logan Paulson, now, of course, an analyst with the team, but we got a lot to talk about, talking about the offseason here, getting ready for the combine. So I'll talk to you next time.